Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Gemma Jerome and I'm here to talk about Building with Nature, which is a company I set up in 2015. But just as a kind of by way of introduction, we've got quite a good multidisciplinary crowd here today, it seems, especially amongst the speakers. So I'm a planner, my background is town planning, and I studied in Liverpool, which is the birthplace of planning, and also public health started in Liverpool. So fantastic place to cut my teeth, as it were. And I mean, Liverpool is a place of many firsts, and it was also the first place I really started to understand the power of nature in the community. So alongside my studies, and my dad would be the first to say, are you ever going to stop studying? I was in Liverpool all the way through to my PhD. But alongside that, I started working in community gardens and helping and working very much alongside people in my community to design gardens. So I took a lot from that last presentation. Prior to becoming an academic, I cut out of society and went to live on a small holding in Scotland, and prior to that I was an anthropology student. So the kind of thread running through all of my life really is thinking about how people are situated in the world, and how much we actually are part of nature. So Building with Nature, which is what I've now developed and I'm going to talk to you about, tries to kind of capture this very essence of the idea I think is originally at the heart of planning as a discipline. Planning came out of thinking about how our environment in the UK was making us unwell. That's the roots of planning. I mean, it's become many things since then. But it does have that at the heart of what it's trying to do, and it's very much at the heart of what I'm trying to do. So the first thing I really want to say is my presentation is about the importance of nature for all life on Earth. So Building with Nature is a national benchmark, and it's setting the standard, as I don't know if I'm in the way of the slides for you there, but it's setting the standard nationally for what we should be including in all of our development. So it's a set of standards and it's an accreditation system. And what we're trying to do is say this isn't difficult actually if it's built in, if it's baked in at the beginning. And actually, green infrastructure, which is the way planners talk about nature, so you'll hear me talk about green infrastructure a couple of times through this presentation, that's what it is, it's the way planners talk about nature. Green infrastructure is basically nature as design. High quality green infrastructure, which is what I've defined through this set of standards, can help define sustainable spaces. And what we're interested in is securing the longevity of well-being for humans and more than humans. So we're in a constant dynamic every moment we live and breathe with the whole of the ecosystem of the planet that we live on. And part of what I do is give agency both to humans and to the more than humans, so to biodiversity. And the other kind of layer to that, the time-space continuum we find ourselves in, is that we are living in an age characterized by uncertainty. So it's possibly never been more important that we have a shared and standardized approach to design that builds nature in. And that's really the big idea. So I've been asked by Oliver to canter through the presentation. So what I'm going to do is just give you three big ideas that the presentation is trying to cover, and then if you stop listening after this, you'll kind of know what it's all about. So Building with Nature is a robust, multidisciplinary and practical tool or design approach for those engaged in creating places for people and wildlife. And it's as simple as that, really. So I bring together architects, landscape architects, ecologists, public health practitioners, communities around the table, literally or virtually, as the past couple of years has had us do, to think about nature at the beginning. So we're going upstream. Instead of it being something that the nature enthusiasts have a small window to contest as part of the formal planning process. It's actually building this in to the design process. I'm going to talk about 12 standards. Think of them as holistic design principles that support, stretch and celebrate places that do this, that places that build with nature. And I've got a couple of case studies about what good looks like. So that's my presentation in a nutshell. The standards are supported by my team, but we have, who also has a board, so we are a charitable organisation with our own board of trustees. We also have a board of green infrastructure experts, and you might recognise some of those names, but it's basically, it's about giving agency to what we're doing and saying it's not just us, it's actually a coalition of people, including government, including professional membership bodies, who are saying we need this and we're behind this. The 12 standards sit around these 4 themes. So I think of these as the essential ingredients of building with nature in mind. So I am going to come on to talk about, sorry my slide's been squashed there, but it's core, well-being, water, wildlife. The 3 W's is the ones to remember. So well-being, water and wildlife, they are essentially the key components to making great places for people and wildlife without compromising either. We do, as I said, have an accreditation system. So think of forestry stewardship when you're looking for something that you want to understand has a holistic approach both to the supply chain and also everybody who's involved in that process. Think of the organic standard. That's what we've created, but it's for development. We need a benchmark because actually we've had policy and legislation in this area for a very long time. We've just had a whole new raft of legislation on the back of the Environment Bill in England. We wanted to create something that could work across the whole of the UK. So Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland, you can use these standards wherever you are. In fact, you could use them anywhere in the world. We get approaches every week from different parts of the world, can we use your standards? Because actually, building with nature looks the same wherever you go. It's actually simple and holistic design. The key thing is quality. So many of the tools that humans have created are about measuring quantums. They're about how far, how much, and actually we are comfortable in that space. When we can quantify something, it feels more comfortable. But so many of the things that matter to us as human beings cannot be quantified. So the closest we can get to that is thinking about quality. We're thinking here about qualitative design principles. So what makes a space feel good? What makes a person feel good? What actually matters when it comes to biodiversity and nature's recovery? So the answer to that is always, it depends. It depends on the person, it depends on the community, it depends on the species, it depends on the landscape. So rather than saying, do this, A to B to C, it's about asking questions around the context. So building with nature is all about being context-led. It really is just a design process, but by standardising it, we're reminding, as a few speakers have said already today, about something we quite often forget over the annals of time. This slide is about we're doing it. There are over 65 projects using the Building with Nature standards, more on their way, and we have endorsement in some very good places. So the National Design Guide that DLUC, Department of Levelling Up and Housing Communities, published recently, includes reference to Building with Nature. So we're starting to build momentum, which is very exciting. In terms of why would people want to do this, so we primarily work directly with those who are supporting a planning applicant to bring a development forward. And they're the multidisciplinary specialists I mentioned earlier, the architects, the landscape architects, the ecologists and so on. Why would you want to do something extra to what you already have to do based on policy and legislation? Well, actually, it's because you get a more than benefit from this. So we we very much are focused on reducing planning uncertainty. What does that mean? Basically, it means that at an earlier stage in the process, you're creating a consensus in the design team about what's expected. And rather than people kind of being in an arbitrary dialogue, so the planners and the developers pushing and pulling, which is often what characterises the development process, it's about saying, actually, let's decide now what our design parameters are. And when it comes to nature, this is a helpful framework. So one of the quotes on a previous slide was from a volume house builder. I won't say who, but it's one of the big baddies, shall we say, which they are responsible for the majority of the development in the UK. And they said, this is great for us, we like this, because actually, if we know what's expected of us much more clearly at an early stage in our not just design process, but our budgeting process, then actually that will save us money. So I'm a pragmatist, even though at the heart of this is an ideal, it's about engaging with stakeholders in a way that then encourages them to do the right thing. So that's another reason we have an accreditation, because who doesn't like an award? And it also gives reassurance to the communities that what is coming forward isn't just good because the developer's marketing team says it's good, isn't just good because it's not planning approval, because actually behind that planning approval is a lot of very stressed out people who have too much work to do and too little time to do it. There's an external body, completely independent, completely neutral, which only believes in nature, saying actually this is good. So we're trying to kind of triangulate planners, developers and communities in that way. A little bit about the standards then. How long have I been talking about that? I should ask the chair.
Yeah,
great.
Exactly.
Right, give me 5 more minutes.
Okay.
So the standards then, what's important? What does building in nature look like? We've managed to reduce this down to 12 core principles. These are design principles. The first thing is that we need nature to be optimizing. Some of these words are big kind of jargon words, multifunctionality and connectivity. What that means is every single space should be doing more than one thing. If you look at nature, anyone here who's got a garden or even just likes kind of walking through the park or walking through a wild space, if you kind of start looking and actually observe what you're seeing, there is nowhere in nature where a piece of ground is doing one thing. It's always doing multiple things constantly. So if you like, this is biophilia. It's actually looking at nature and trying to replicate it in our human systems. Connectivity is key as well. The Lawton report said very clearly a long time ago now, the reason nature is in decline, the reason we have a catastrophic collapse in biodiversity, and there's not many things that the UK is at the top of the league table at the moment, but that is one of them, is because we are fragmenting the landscape with development. Now, if you turn that on its head, if development is nature-rich, it becomes the connector in that network. So the solution is always in the problem. That's the permaculture principle that I believe in, and that's what this one is about. The second one is about we need our development to be responding positively to the climate emergency, and I believe and I know we can do that. So this is about kind of aligning with the net zero carbon agenda and recognizing that yes, we can get tech heavy with that, but actually nature is already our best ally in actually encouraging people to choose different behaviours which are healthy and climate positive. And I'm sure you can all think of examples of that. We need to think about environmental net gain, so it has to be holistic. Planning can't just be about minimising or mitigating the harm we do to the environment. We have to be doing more than that, and nature, again, is the best way we can do that. We need to think about context every single time. You can't tell a community what they should want. It has to be driven as much as possible by the community, and when I say community, I don't just mean people, I mean look at what's there, and that includes nature, that includes biodiversity. So this is not a prescriptive approach. We don't tell you what to do, like X number of hectares of this type of habitat in this place. There are other tools for that. We say, look at what's there, what's valuable and special about that place, how do we create more of that, how do we enhance what's there. And if there isn't anything, which I completely would refute that there is nowhere which doesn't have special character and people who have strengths as well as needs, then think as creatively as you can. Distinctive places is what you'll end up with, and one of the biggest kind of critiques of the development system right now is that we're creating these communities where, and I'm a judge on the Housing Design Awards. I recently looked at developments up and down the UK, and to be frank, sometimes you can be dropped into development and you have no idea where you are. There's just no sense of it being rooted anywhere, and we have to stop that. We're creating slums of the future if we're not careful. Placekeeping, again, is a planning term, but it's all about, you don't just build it, you have to think about the long term. And this is one of my really big areas of passion, because my roots is in environmental stewardship and volunteering, and the big society was a myth. You can't expect communities and volunteers to manage green space. It has to be a partnership approach, and too much of our new developments and retrofitting communities just thinks about planning, implementation, and then it falls off a cliff. We have to be thinking long term. Okay, well-being, bringing nature closer to people, super key to everything we do at Building with Nature. It's not just about the nature is over there, people will go to it. No, it has to be in and around where people are. And supporting equitable and inclusive places, we can't leave anyone behind. And actually, I said it already, but we have to think about people's strengths and not just people's needs. And that's a big idea of Building with Nature. We need to think about water. Too often, planning is about water being a problem. I heard in your presentation that flood risk was part of the design approach. And we need to recognise that when our developments are sponges, when there is sustainable drainage systems all the way through, when we make space for that and we don't just think about the footprint of the buildings, then actually water is an asset. Because actually bringing water close to where people are is a way and approach, a design asset to bring people joy. It also brings biodiversity, which is key. And then finally, the wildlife standards. We have to reverse the collapse in biodiversity. We now more than ever understand that the climate emergency and nature emergency are the same emergency. You can't tackle one without the other. And we have to think about nature's recovery, and that's the connectivity. So they're the 12 standards. I do have more slides, but I'm also conscious of time, Chair. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. A lot of stuff there. There might be some questions. Somebody's thinking of a question. Can I ask
questions?
one?
If we do as many questions as we can, then kind of lure into a break.
Yeah, we're about to go into a break, so you can everybody can ask questions confident of it stopping quite soon. Gemma, can I just ask on the point about keeping places, place keeping? I mean, is there any way that legislation could reduce the number of developers who just put things up and sell them, put it up and sell it, and change to more of a stewardship arrangement where people take long-term responsibility, don't sell on, keep leases, and that, like the great estates, for example. Is there any way that stewardship can be brought into that?
So our experience at Building Nature is that the optimal management arrangement will vary project to project. So we don't want to prescribe a particular management arrangement and then legalize, standardize that as a legal requirement. But what we do, and this is intrinsic to our benchmark, which, as I said, we're getting more and more endorsement from local authorities and from central government and from industry itself, which I think is key, is that there is consideration about the management and maintenance at the beginning, because too often everything's designed and then management and maintenance is considered. So what we're endorsing is that actually integral to the design is a low maintenance, or even where possible a no maintenance approach, so you don't get the viability being the argument as to why you can't continue. I think as well, somebody earlier mentioned skills and a skills gap in industry. I think the other thing we're interested in influencing is that there are specialist bodies, management companies, who are ideally situated to take. I don't think the whole business model will change where you suddenly have house builders who they keep it for a year until it's established, but then they pass it on to a management company. And the reality is not everyone wants to have an active engagement with their environment, but what I think we can do is build a higher level of skills within the industry of organisations and companies that manage green infrastructure, so they understand about health and well-being, they understand about biodiversity, and that's probably the best way at scale that we can influence.
Thank you. Meredith.
It's a really important thing. I mean, it's a fabulous. I didn't know about the nature stance. I'm going to look at and encourage people to do it. And this idea about management, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
And what we have seen is that divesting of responsibilities or management company can often lead to high service charges for people who apply in property and have no idea that was coming.
Yeah.
And we've done a number of projects with community organisations who actively and not really, part of the way in which they act as a community.
Yeah.
But that's clearly not always the way in which it's enacted. So I think part of making it work and part of what makes the community come together is trying to figure out what mechanisms can be used to.
I just wanted to touch on a couple of things like tools that, from a public health perspective, that can really kind of help with kind of helping unlock some of those questions that were asked, particularly in the presentation before. So there was a question around, is well-being and prevention measurable? Well, the answer is yes. You've got a number of different data sources like community surveys, residential surveys, public health outcomes framework, is all about measuring health and well-being, short, medium, long-term impacts, and setting that baseline and doing those case studies, to understand if we do nothing, what is the impact? If we do something, we can measure it from there. And then there was something around how can we basically work with the system to remove barriers and create opportunities. In public health, we talk a lot about taking a whole systems approach. So that's getting all the partners and having that conversation. And we do what we call systems mapping. So, for example, if you take obesity, we know that the issue with obesity is not just hot food takeaways. It's around, proximity to schools. It's around, how the economy is working. And so it's about it's about opportunities that can be presented within a local plan. So once you do some of that mapping, which parts of the system are responsible for which parts of a particular issue, you can then kind of join those dots up. So I just wanted to throw that out. And I think, there was a question as well, finally, around, I can't remember exactly how the question was framed, but is wellness and illness the business? Well, actually, wellness and prosperity, I would argue, is the business, because there's that whole conversation around, you think about wellness, you think about health, you think about NHS, you think about services. Actually, wellness and prosperity is taking that kind of social and looking at the kind of economic prosperity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, and also you can make use of health impact assessments for developments. Any developments that are coming forward in the community, you can always ask a developer to do a health impact assessment. They may say no, but we are working with local plans to try and get health impact assessments into policy.
Thank you.